An enclosed conical structure silently appeared from the floor 5 meters away, while another door opened on the opposite side of the chamber. A vaguely humanoid android appeared, holding a tray with a liter-sized glass containing clear liquid and what looked like food. It walked towards them, stopping 10 meters away from his position as another structure slid out of the tiled floor and morphed into a table and chair that were perfectly sized to human proportions. The Malite turned and walked out of the chamber, its suit legs whirring softly. Ray walked over to the conical structure and peered inside, seeing that it had a toilet and a sink. He relieved his bladder, and after figuring out how to activate the sink water, he washed his hands and left the commode. He went over to the table to inspect the food that was placed there. Seeing that it was formed of what looked like gelatinous cubes, he gingerly tasted one, finding that it was bland. He swallowed that cube and 2 more, chasing them down with the water that was provided, and then sat down in the chair. He was surprised as the solid-looking material molded itself to him as he moved in it. It was quite comfortable, and he leaned his head back and closed his eyes, trying to calm himself down after the emotionally charged discussion he had just had with the Malite. He was startled awake an indeterminate amount of time later by the presence of the Malite exosuit, and he looked around, confused. He had fallen asleep, and his subconscious must have made him aware of the large figure in front of him. He had a disturbing dream of being on a ship surrounded by people, and they were begging him to help them as their skin sloughed off in large sheets. He kept trying to put their skin back on while they were screaming in pain and staring at him with bloody, empty eye sockets, their eyeballs having already melted from the salted fusion missiles. The Malite reached out a 3-fingered suit hand, offering him his wrist pad back. He took it, looking at the time displayed on the screen, his eyes squinting at the elapsed time. 8 hours? I slept for 8 hours. How? His thoughts grew in confusion, and then he started panicking, pushing himself out of the chair and stumbling a little bit as the grogginess persisted. "Did you drug me?" he asked the Malite, anger coursing through him at the thought of them violating him like that. He looked at his wrist pad again, and as his mind cleared up from the effects of whatever they gave him, he realized that the assault on the Ominian system had already begun over 4 hours ago. The Malite answered him, its synthesized voice still speaking in Republic Standard. "You fell asleep, naturally. After verifying the contents of the data device, we flooded the chamber with gas to perpetuate your normal sleep cycle while we decided on what to do." Ray looked around, his confusion mounting. He was about to start speaking again when the Malite raised a suit hand, and he clamped his mouth shut, grinding his teeth in frustration. A scout ship was sent to the Hive world in Republic space to verify the truth of the matter. We detected the Hive and the presence of humans inside of it. This changes the parameters that we have held ourselves to regarding the insectoids, and we no longer consider them to be a force of nature incapable of reasoning. The Malite paused, putting down the suit hand it had been holding up before continuing. Therefore, we reached a consensus among ourselves that to remain neutral in the matter of the Civil War and the use of the outlawed fusion missiles would be a dereliction of our duties and responsibilities under the Treaty of Sirius. We injected you with a protective agent to mitigate the effects of our advanced null drives during our journey here. That agent is why you are suffering lingering effects. The Malite paused again, and a large hollow screen shimmered into existence along one of the walls of the chamber. It took Ray a few moments to figure out what was being shown to him, and he gasped as understanding finally dawned on him. The Malite had moved the border outpost he was on over 1,000 light-years to the Ominian system in just a few hours, a feat almost beyond his comprehension. He had no idea that the massive ringed structure over 5 kilometers in radius was even capable of navigating null space. He was stunned at the display of such raw technological power, and he could barely fathom the energy requirements to do such a thing. He was also shocked by the rapidity of their actions, as they had never made decisions or reached a consensus with the celerity they had just displayed. As he continued to look at the hollow screen, he could see the wreckage of hundreds of Commonwealth ships scattered throughout the system, as well as the remains of multiple defensive forts. A massive battle was fought all over the system, and the hollow screen zoomed in on an area of space along the boundary between the inner and outer systems. There were over a dozen drifting Commonwealth ships, still intact with signs of scorching on their hulls, but no obvious critical damage such as breaches or weapon impacts. Malite script appeared along the bottom of the hollow screen, and as his ocular implant deciphered it, dread mounted inside him as the scans confirmed that they had been hit with salted fusion missiles. We were too late, he thought as he tore his eyes away from the hollow screen, his heart heavy with grief. They must pay for this, he thought, turning back to face the Malite, his grief being replaced with an overwhelming desire for vengeance against the cowardly Ominians. Honored Elder, they have used the outlawed weapons and they must pay for their actions, he ground out between his clenched teeth, not caring that he was snarling at the Malite as he spoke. The Malite focused its sensor lenses on him, and he could see the inner mechanisms rotating as they roamed over his face. Human, it is not your place to punish them. The Malite will sanction the offenders and you will abide by the judgment we render, as will your government. The rest of the Commonwealth fleet is in null space and we will order them to exit and see the penalty we will impose. Relief flooded through Ray when he heard that there were survivors of the failed assault, and he closed his eyes, whispering a grateful prayer. He opened them again and addressed the Malite, his voice trembling with emotion. Honored Elder, I am grateful that you have chosen to intercede, and the Republic will never forget this. We have a long memory, and we will be forever indebted to you. The Malite responded after a long moment. It is our duty. Perhaps we have forgotten that in our desire to limit our interaction with the younger species. Thank you for reminding us that we are still needed, my human child. You will speak to the Commonwealth fleet on our behalf, and order them to exit and assemble their fleet 900 million kilometers from the primary and one of your astronomical units above the plane of the ecliptic. The Malite turned towards the holoscreen and Ray followed suit, quickly fixing his sash and smoothing his hair back. I wish the commode had a mirror, he thought. He must have looked quite a sight after all he had been through. A few seconds later, the holoscreen changed and he saw a male Nakuli appear on an obviously damaged Commonwealth bridge. Commodore Therax had a carefully guarded expression, though Ray could see the surprise in his eyes as they roamed over them. He probably was not expecting to be speaking with a Malite, especially in the Ominian system. The Commodore bowed his head and looked at the Malite exosuit, addressing it first. Honored Elder, may the ancestors bless you. I am Commodore Therax, and I am honored that you have deigned to speak to me. How may I be of service? The Commodore's eyes quickly flicked over to look at him again before returning to the Malite. The Malite responded, its synthesized voice speaking in the Nakuli language as it replied. His translator activated immediately, having detected another language, and Ray listened intently as it translated the Malite response to Commodore Therax. You will speak with the human representative. He speaks for me. Consider all commands from him to be our own. I must depart and prepare the sanctions. The Malite exosuit abruptly turned and started walking towards the exit, and Ray saw the chagrined expression on Commodore Therax's face as the Nakuli turned his eyes to look at him, upset by the dismissive attitude of the Malite. Ray understood how he was feeling, considering their ancestor worship. They had an extreme reverence for the Malite, and to be dismissed by one so curtly was most certainly hurtful to the Commodore. Ray bowed his head in the proper gesture of respect and spoke quickly to try to mitigate some of the offense Therax must be feeling. Commodore Therax, I am honored to meet you. I am Ray Bunkum, and I ask that you not be upset by the unintended curtness of the Malite Elder. It is deeply disturbed by the actions of the Ominians and the losses suffered by your crews. Commodore Therax's expression softened after hearing his words, and he appeared to be somewhat mollified by the explanation. He returned the head bow to Ray before responding. I am honored to know you, Ambassador Buncombe. May I ask what is going on here? We are about to launch a planetary bombardment on Ominia. They must be punished for daring to use those evil weapons. Ray nodded and held up both hands in a placating gesture as he responded. Commodore, I share in your desire for vengeance, and if it were up to me, I would do the same. It is not up to you or me anymore. The Malite have decided to intervene and require our obedience in this matter. You are to assemble your fleet in an orderly formation and exit null space, 900 million kilometers from the star and 1 AU above the plane of the ecliptic. Commodore Therax regarded him with suspicion, narrowing his eyes as he responded. They have hundreds of those abominations throughout the system running cold, just waiting for my fleet to flash out of null space and irradiate them. I refuse to make such an unsound tactical error, and if you were here, you would refuse to do so as well after watching your crews get hit by them. Ray smirked, realizing from the Commodore's words that the Malite somehow were able to hide the massive border outpost, despite being in between the orbits of the third and fourth planets. The Malite technology was incredible, and he relished the thought that this meant that the Ominians also had no idea they were there either. Commodore Therax, I am in this very system, 85 million kilometers from the sun, on board a Malite automated border outpost. You will comply with the orders of the Malite, or we will leave, your choice. Therax looked away from the screen, obviously listening to someone on the bridge confirmed that they could not detect the presence of the station. He turned his gaze back and took a deep breath before responding. I am trusting you with the lives of thousands of my warriors. Do you swear upon your honor that no harm will come to them? Ray nodded. I swear upon my honor, Commodore. No harm will come to your ships. Please comply. After a few moments of uncomfortable silence, Commodore Therax flicked his head before ordering his crew to close the channel. The holoscreen went back to the view of the solar system, and Ray waited patiently for the Commonwealth fleet to flash out of null space. 2 solar minutes later, the scanners picked up exit flashes far out in the system and zoomed in, showing the fleet emerging in neat, orderly formations. Ray sucked in a breath between his teeth as he saw the scanning results displaying the number of ships. There were only 728 ships remaining out of the over 1,100-strong fleet that had invaded the system. The Malite scanners also showed the positions of hundreds of fusion missiles loitering throughout the system, easily able to detect them even though they had powered down to avoid emissions detection as they cold-coasted, waiting to strike. In the inner system, there were thousands of small ships with no life signs, and their cores were obviously overpowered for such small vessels. Those must be the suicide boats, he thought as he continued to take in the scanning information that populated the holoscreen. The Malite sensors had scanned Therax's ships when they flashed out, and discerned that the Commonwealth ships had hundreds of missiles with antimatter warheads, definitely not standard munitions. They must have reconfigured them while hiding in null space. Conflicting emotions raged inside him as he realized just how close the Commonwealth fleet had come to committing genocide. On a personal level, a part of him wished that they had not come to the system and stopped Therax. The Ominians deserved to die for what they did. On a logical level, he was grateful that they did stop Therax in time. The government of the Republic would have most likely reacted with horror. They would have certainly cut off all ties with the rebel fleet, and any government that would have been formed after winning the Civil War. He heard a Malite exosuit entering the chamber and turned around, waiting silently for the Malite to reach him. It took position next to him, and they both resumed looking at the holoscreen while it spoke. Sanction has been decided based upon the severity of the Ominian violation of the Treaty of Sirius. They have shown that they are capable of evil, and they will pay the price for such abhorrent behavior. They are no longer worthy of being a space-faring society, and they will now suffer the indignity of being a planet-bound species for 10 generations. This is our judgment. Ray continued looking at the screen without replying or acknowledging the statement. He thought it was too lenient, but he had agreed to abide by the judgment of the Malite, and as the representative of the Republic, his government was now bound to the judgment, as was the Commonwealth Liberation Fleet. The Malite spoke again. It now begins.